afternoon or evening, depending on what side of the pond you're on. And welcome back to the third episode in the series that we're doing on the history of Stevenage. My name is Phil Kennedy, and I have Jonathan Hibberd back with me today. And if you haven't heard the first two episodes we've done on Stevenage, you'll definitely want to go back and hear those as we've gone kind of in a chronological order. On the last show, we kind of wrapped up around 2002. We're going to pick up with some matches that happened after that. But before that, Jonathan, of course, there has been some announcements regarding the ending of the League Two season that could have a very negative impact on Stevenage, of course. So I know that you wanted to start off by discussing that a little bit. And of course, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks. It's not kind of the news we were hoping for, really. There was a vote a couple of weeks ago of the League Two clubs themselves who voted to end the season, but also voted to say that they didn't think that any team should be relegated. But it's all changed since then. And apparently what's been said or what's claimed is that teams higher up in the pecking order, so in the Premier League, the Championship, and so on, they were worried that, those leagues were worried that they were going to be able to look at our situation of escaping relegation as a kind of precedent, which is a shame for us because I don't think that's actually true at all. I think when teams were not relegated for 3 seasons in the 90s. I don't think there was any Premier League team claiming that there was a precedent for why they shouldn't be relegated. But obviously, what we've heard as well is that the Macclesfield situation has got worse. So they are facing further charges because they apparently failed to pay their players 6 times this season. So
that's really what this is ultimately going to come down to. And is it how many points would Macclesfield need to be deducted at this point? I know they were already deducted. Was it 7?
Yeah, I think they would need to be deducted another 4 because they'd still have a better goal difference than us. But basically, what's going to happen is it's going to go to an independent commission. There are various rumours around. One rumour that's quite interesting is that the EFL are very, very unhappy with what Macclesfield have been doing. They there's a school of thought that they might want to make an example of a team that hasn't been paying its players. I mean, back in, I think it must have been November, the FA Cup first round, Macclesfield played Kingstonian, a non-league side, and their first team were on strike for that game. So they actually had to put out a youth team that lost, I don't know if it was 4-0, 4-1 to a non-league team. So they've been in a mess all season. And as I was kind of saying before, we like to think that we're a kind of well-run club and, we'd like to see that rewarded in a way. But I think as we kind of said before, I don't know if we can really have massive complaints if we go down from a footballing point of view.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly from a footballing standpoint, I don't think that there's anybody that could really make the argument that Stevenage would deserve to stay up based on results on the pitch because it just has been as bad of a season from that standpoint as you can get. But going back, like you said, I mean, ultimately, yes, the results haven't been there on the pitch this year, but based on everything I've read, based on everything you've told me, is that Stevenage ultimately, from an ownership and financial standpoint, is one of the clubs that's doing things the right way. So, I mean, I have a hard time seeing how it would be good for the Football League to keep around Macclesfield and then realistically probably have them end up doing something like a Barry anyway, and then send down a team that, seems to be doing things the right way. It just doesn't seem like a good business decision. And that's where it gets to be a gray area is ultimately what supersedes. Is it the football decision or the business decision? And, the purist in me would have to say that, what happened on the pitch happened on the pitch. But then at the same time, if Macclesfield isn't even paying their players, then to me, that's kind of like cheating. So
yeah. Well, certainly the Stevenage chairman makes that argument. But I think what has come round to me is, as I kind of, obviously I'm a bit biased, but I'm starting to feel that really teams relegated on points per game is not really very defensible. And it's been really interesting this week that in France, the two teams that were relegated from Ligue 1 in France appealed to court and they won. So the French league has been told they can't relegate teams on points per game. And I have to say, I think that's the kind of strongest argument. And what really worries me at this stage, I think if we had got relegated in a normal season, in the normal way, it's what we were all expecting. We've been in the conference before. None of that particularly worried me too much. It would have been a pity, but we've had, 10 brilliant years. In the situation we're in, where, if you're a Football League club, you've got certain responsibilities and trappings and fixed costs of being a Football League club. So you've got, higher security arrangements. You've got a police tower to run. You've got...
you don't have to go out and negotiate your own TV deal.
No, exactly. And you've got an academy status for your youth setup. And basically, if you get relegated, the youth setup loses academy status. And that means a huge cut in funding, and it means job losses and those kinds of things, right?
Well, it also probably means that certain players are going to want to move on to a different academy. Also, the other thing is, I don't know what the exact number is for League Two, but I know Andy Holt had said something that at Accrington's take of the TV money is about £750,000 per year. So I'm thinking that for League Two, it's maybe about £400,000. So that's a guaranteed, £500,000, close to £500,000 that it goes away. That's a big number in terms of League Two. It doesn't seem like that's what the limo driver gets paid in the Premier League. But for League Two, you could probably pay your starting 11 for a few months with that money.
Yeah, the issue is, obviously promotion and relegation is the bread and butter of, certainly English football, European football. And I know there are people, obviously, in the US who are quite sympathetic to, if I say the Teds and the Bens of this world, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. But promotion and relegation is not a panacea, right? It's been very, very tough on certain teams. So we had teams like Darlington, Hereford, Chester, teams that went out of the league, and then in the end they couldn't make ends meet, and those teams ended up going bankrupt, having to reform. Scarborough is another one. And so relegation, it should definitely, be a part of English football. It is a part of English football, but it's a precarious thing and it shouldn't be taken lightly. And the issue that we're facing is, how is the National League going to start in September or whatever with no fans in the stadium? How are we going to start with no gate receipts, having had to make all of this restructuring that you have to do when you come out of the Football League? So I think that's the issue for me, really, that we lose gate receipts, we lose iFollow, all of that kind of thing. So in the end, I'm really of the view that nobody should go down this season. And I think that League Two could live with an extra club for a year and then sort things out after that. But as I said, probably am a bit biased.
To me, the most fair thing would be just to kind of promote Borough in place of Barry, and then just kind of leave everything else as is. I mean, I think the National League, they canceled their season. There doesn't seem to be any kind of a plan of having a playoff. They don't even know what
that's come back today. That's come back as an idea today. So they still have to vote on that. And that staggers me, really. I mean, as we mentioned, I've got another hat, which is my Pompey hat. And we're suddenly told that Portsmouth are in the League One playoffs and they could go up to the Championship. But I'm really in two minds about this, because if you have said that it's not safe to play anymore, it's prohibitively expensive and so on, if the league is cancelled, how do you then hold the playoffs? And how do you then hold the playoffs in the National League?
Here's what I saw with the playoffs is with the playoffs, you're talking about 6 games versus completing the season with something around 186 games. So I could say, okay, we do this for 6 games. You pay the cost of the COVID tests for those 6 games. It's significantly, less than playing 180. And I thought that the at least the playoffs for League One and League Two, I thought that was kind of a done deal. I was more talking about the National League, because I was under the understanding that the National League had officially voted to cancel their season to a point where they couldn't come back and then say, okay, let's do playoffs. The other thing that we would be coming on is, even if they did, we're at June 12th today. So I mean, even if they say they voted tomorrow on June 13th, you're going to have at least a 2-week quarantine of the players before you can even start anything. That puts them out to June 28th. Contracts end on June 30th. So yeah, that's not, there's just no way.
The whole point of the playoffs is they were supposed to prolong interest till the end of the season. They were supposed to, enliven those last 10 or so games, and we've lost those games, so the whole kind of purpose of it has gone. And it's a very strange playoff system in the National League anyway. I don't know if you've seen it, but basically the 2nd to the 7th team is involved. So there are 6 players.
Yeah, isn't it like, I think the second place team gets like a bye in the first round, and then 3 plays 7.
God knows.
I remember it last year, and it came down to Fylde and Salford, and nobody wanted anybody to win that game.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was fascinating actually going away to Salford City. Was our first away game this season, and basically the renovation of the stadium is very, very plastic. They've basically thrown up a load of sort of temporary structures that are sort of held together with duct tape and things like that. It's a very, very strange club. So I'm going to delve back into the past, if I may.
I know we maybe spent a little bit more time on that than we had planned to, but I think that's definitely relevant right now. And I did just want to kind of close with, I think that, if it comes down to between Stevenage and Macclesfield getting sent down, I don't see how you could possibly justify keeping up a team that's not paying their players over a well-run club. And that's just kind of my bottom line.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I feel actually quite deflated, like either way now, really, that it's going to be decided by committee, which was the kind of sad old way of doing things that we were trying to, escape, and that Stevenage lobbied to end those kind of practices, So it's a shame, but...
One question I did have for you before we move on to the past stuff had to do with the Burger King sponsorship, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the terms of that. Was that a multi-year thing? Is that something that they would be in danger of losing if they get relegated? Do you know anything with that? Because I imagine that. That's a nice sponsor. As much as we make fun of it, that's a nice sponsor for a League Two team.
Definitely. I think it's going to stay. I mean, certainly the new shirts are already out.
Okay.
And the new shirts have got Burger King on them. So, it's not unheard of for shirt sponsors to, change through a season and so on. But it sounds to me anyway like the whole idea of the Burger King sponsorship was to do these things like the Stevenage Challenge and that kind of thing, which, are not going to be as good if it's a non-league team, but they can still go ahead, So,
I mean, I want to see good things for the club, and I'm the kind of guy that regardless of rooting interest, I know that every club out there has passionate fans, and ultimately I just want to see the best for any club.
Yeah, and I just hope under these circumstances where it's particularly difficult to relegate a Football League club, I just hope it doesn't end in bankruptcy. But I honestly think for whoever gets relegated, it's a really, really, it's playing with fire. That's honestly how I feel right now.
Well, let's knock on wood that doesn't happen, and let's get back to talking about the past. And I think that you said that you wanted to start off by talking about an FA Trophy matchup, as I recall.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I kind of ended by talking about the first time we got to an FA Trophy final. There were a couple of things I missed off from that, which I can mention very briefly. We talked about Phil Wallace and his great ideas, his sort of off-the-wall ideas. And there was a really off-the-wall idea that season that Stevenage Borough Football Club were going to collaborate with UK Channel 4 to do because it was around the time all these reality TV shows were starting, like Big Brother and that kind of thing. So basically, there was a press release saying that our football club was going to take part in a Channel 4 TV program called You're the Manager. And it was going to be an interactive thing where viewers could actually make substitutions by text message and pick the team and so on. So it was a really, really crazy idea. And of course, in the end, the conference
I've read about some of those things, and I'd seen some of them on YouTube. And I know that those were, I know there's some famous throwing around of teapots and things like that.
Yeah. So, we'll file that under, Phil Wallace's great ideas. But the star of that would have been a strange character called DJ Campbell, who was a young, very, very talented player, but just one of those young footballers who didn't quite have his head screwed on. But he sorted himself out later and went on to play for, I think it was Birmingham City in the Premier League. So one of a select club of Stevenage players that have gone on to play in the top division. But yeah, let's fast forward for a few years. I mean, a lot of Stevenage fans, I don't know if they are so much now, but certainly, for a while, a lot of older Stevenage fans were quite nostalgic for our days in the conference. But I think what maybe they forget is we had some really, really lean years in the conference. I had, several years of watching pretty terrible football in that league and some pretty terrible managerial appointments. I mean, there's one guy, Wayne Turner, now he didn't even last a year. And I think he's now a physical education teacher or something like that. So we had, a few lean years, but it all looked very promising towards the end of the 2000s. Stevenage managed to get Mark Stimpson, who was a very promising manager at that time. He'd had great success with Grays Athletic. So they got him in, and actually the first few games with him were really weird because we didn't do very well because the manager was kind of trying out new stuff and whatever. But in the end, the team started to click. And that happened to be the year that Wembley Stadium, the reconstructed Wembley Stadium, was going to be reopened. And you might remember the old Twin Towers of Wembley. Which were iconic, but of course are now no more. There was some talk about incorporating it into the new design or moving them and reconstructing them somewhere else. And it turned out that there wasn't really a viable way to do that. So we lost the
Wembley
Twin Towers.
as a whole is a bit of a sore subject for us Accrington fans.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never been there before.
Neither is Accrington, so that's why it's a sore subject.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're one of only 2 league clubs that have never played at Wembley. So it's funny. It's every time Accrington's got a promotion, it's been by winning the league. So they've just never been there for whatever reason.
Oh, it's a nice.
If we had beaten you in 2011, that would have been our chance.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It's kind of. I got really used to Wembley actually. There's a strange thing with me that I went to university in Cardiff, and that was at a time when tickets to go and watch the Wales national team were really cheap. Okay. And my grandmother is Welsh, actually, so I sort of qualify under FIFA rules, if you like. So I kind of ended up, and I'm still basically a Wales fan more than an England fan, which is, a bit strange, but I figure people can do what they want. I get some strange looks.
Hey, I'm an Accrington fan in Phoenix, so
yeah, exactly. So, I haven't really been to Wembley to watch international football, but I sort of got really used to the place because Stevenage went in 2007. Portsmouth won the cup there a year later. Stevenage won the FA Trophy again the year after that. So, and then I think Portsmouth got to the FA Cup final again the following year. So I got kind of used to Wembley as part of the scenery.
Of course, Portsmouth went there last year for the Checkatrade Trophy.
Yeah, I was very conflicted about that because I'm obviously really, really unhappy that they've allowed B teams in that competition, but you can't have everything. So,
what I found is that the B teams don't tend to be particularly competitive. I think to me, if the B teams were going out and winning it or getting to the finals, that would be a problem. But Accrington smoked the Liverpool B team like 5-1, so I'll take that all day.
Yeah. And the thing is, I kind of broached a sort of controversial idea recently, which is that maybe you could have Premier League B teams in the lower divisions in an unofficial capacity. And I got this idea from when I was in Wales, and at one time the 2 biggest rugby teams in Wales, Cardiff and Swansea, were in some argument with the league, and they left the league and they didn't have a league to play in for a year. So they played friendlies against every team in the English league and appeared in the league table in italics, right? Mm-hmm. So they were sort of unofficial members of the league. And I was thinking, maybe you could do B teams like that, and at the end of the day, if they're giving us some money, then maybe it would be worth it. I don't know.
I kind of like what you're saying, and here's my philosophy has always been that with the what's it called now, leasing.com trophy, I believe it's called.
It changes every year.
Yeah, so that with that competition, a cup competition, I don't have a problem with the B teams coming into that because it's kind of a one-off single elimination. I certainly would never, ever, ever, ever in a million years want to see, Arsenal under 21 in League Two or something like that. I like what you're getting at. The only thing that I would say is you already have teams playing 46 matches plus cup competitions. Is there really time in the schedule to play friendlies like that?
No, there isn't at the moment. And it would come in if there was something like the regionalisation that you've been discussing in the other podcasts. So, in that case, if you had, 20-team official leagues and then 4 B teams unofficially, then, maybe you could do it then. I don't know. But anyway, so getting back to 2007, so that was a team with some really, really promising players. One that went on to particularly great things is Steve Morrison. He briefly played in the Premier League for Norwich City, and he's played on and off for Millwall. I think he's a bit of a club legend at Millwall. But the new Wembley had just been completed. There was one test event, which I think was an under-21 friendly between England and Italy, but that wasn't, an official competitive football match. So the first match at the new Wembley was remarkably the 2007 FA Trophy final between Kidderminster Harriers and Stevenage Borough. Now, it's a strange one for me to choose as one of my kind of classic games because I wasn't actually there. I was in an Irish pub in Kiev, Ukraine. And I think
do they serve Guinness in the Ukraine?
Of course they do. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Maybe I can make a trip there after all that. That's all.
It's a wonderful place, and you know what? I mean, I could have some certain regrets that I did miss some kind of classic games from not being in England. You know, if I think about, you know, when Stevenage got to League One and they were playing league games against Wolves and Sheffield Wednesday and Sheffield United, and they were winning those games, you know, I kind of missed out on that. But on the other hand, I can't have any regrets because I went on this sort of fantastic football odyssey of watching teams like Dynamo Kiev. I went to a very famous UEFA Cup game between Ferencváros and Millwall in Budapest, which is notorious for all the various trouble that went on in the city that week. But anyway, so getting back to
the Ukrainian league, it started up again 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, and but Ukrainian league's in a sorry state. I mean, it used to be quite a decent league with about 6 teams playing in sort of top quality stadiums and things, and because of various political problems and financial problems, it's a shadow of its past self, unfortunately. So I was in this Irish pub in Kiev, and normally I have to kind of beg to get those games put on, but the game was already ready to start, and that's because the guy I watched it with was a Ukrainian guy.
Okay.
And I asked him what his interest was. He said, I'm supporting Kidderminster. And I was like, what? It turned out that this guy, and I think a lot of people have done this. They've played as a team on like Football Manager or whatever, and they've kind of grown an attachment to this team that they adopted. And he'd grown an attachment to Kidderminster to the extent that he told me that he'd written the Ukrainian language Wikipedia article on Kidderminster Harriers.
That's incredible. I love stories like that. I love that. And yeah, I mean, it kind of brings me back to, when I first started following Accrington, putting in the video game and figuring out who the names of the players were that way. And there's a guy that I talked to over in New Mexico that started following Rochdale that way just because he used them on the video game. So yeah, I love stories like that.
Yeah, well, obviously it's great because if you are watching a game like that, it's such a big, important game, you kind of want somebody supporting the other team to be there. And he was really into it. And he was obviously really, really delighted at half time because Kidderminster were winning that match 2-0. And I should explain that it's known to Stevenage fans as the Mitchell Cole final. So Mitchell Cole was a gutsy young player who, had sort of flirtations with playing in the Football League itself, but more or less kind of settled at that kind of conference level. And the reason I think there are 2 reasons it's known as the Mitchell Cole final. One is that after half time, he basically more or less single-handedly got hold of the game and started creating chances. And you almost think of it as a sort of non-league equivalent of Steven Gerrard in the famous Champions League final.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was that kind of heroic performance. So he got the first goal back in that game. So it's remembered for his performance.
What position was he? Was he like a winger?
He was a midfielder. Like a winger midfielder.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the one position where a guy could really dominate every facet of the game from it. And, there's just, to me, the best players and the players that I enjoy watching the most are those guys that from the wing, they can score goals, they can create assists, they can create turnovers on defense. I mean, when you think of a player like Zinedine Zidane, for instance, or modern day like an Eden Hazard, I mean, those are the guys to me that I just love watching play.
Well, Mitchell Cole wasn't always firing, but when he did, he was a great player. And I say was sadly because he left us in 2012. He passed away because of a heart condition. And it was actually the same year, in March of that year, a Bolton Wanderers player, Fabrice Muamba, collapsed on the pitch. And he was clinically dead for over an hour.
Oh, wow.
And basically in 2011, this is something that's, I suppose it can affect anybody, but it affects footballers in a particular way. I met a guy, actually, he was an American who came out to the church that I was going to in Warsaw, Poland at that time. And he was from the Columbus area, so he's a Crew supporter.
Okay.
Not as in our crew, but your crew.
Yeah, Columbus.
Yeah, and he was an interesting character because he had been a really promising college soccer player, but kind of early on in his time at college, he had some medical tests and they told him, look, you've got this heart condition and you basically your life is at risk every time you're playing soccer. And it has a lot to do with the fact that unlike other athletes, if you're doing the 100 meters sprint, you have your sprint and then it's done. Or if you are a long distance runner, you're doing the same thing for all that time. But the particular danger, if you're playing football, is the start-stop nature of it. And apparently that puts those people particularly at risk.
I would imagine that basketball may be somewhat similar to.
Yeah, it could well be. So this is something that I think is more common than you'd think. And in 2011, Mitchell Cole was advised to stop playing football, and he stopped playing football professionally. He, I think he was one of these people. He was a real Londoner, kind of. I don't know if he was actually East End, but he was that kind of a real Cockney of the kind that you rarely.
There's a word you don't hear over here.
Yeah, I mean, he was, the type of real Londoner that you kind of rarely meet these days. I believe his sister is married to Joe Cole, who, of course, great English player who also played, I think he played some time in Florida, didn't he?
I lost the name of the team there.
Yeah,
the Florida teams have such stupid names here. I know all I can think of is Inter Miami, and that's the brand new.
I think Joe Cole played for the reboot of the Tampa Bay Rowdies, is it?
Yeah, Tampa Bay Rowdy. That's what I was trying to think of. All I could think of was Inter Miami and the Florida Soccer Soldiers.
But so there's this kind of London posse almost. I think people like Harry Redknapp and they all know each other basically. So he was a very kind of genuine lad, and I think even when he was told not to play professional football anymore, he loved to play. That was what he most enjoyed doing. So he kind of thought, well, I can play for amateur football, right? So he played for Stevenage's old rivals, Hitchin Town. He played for a village club, Arlesey Town, near us. But when Muamba collapsed, he basically had a bit of a reality check and said, I shouldn't be playing football anymore. And he did officially hang up his boots, but sadly, his illness still got the better of him, and he died in November that year, aged 27. So it's known obviously as the Mitchell Cole final because he had a great game, because he played a game-changing role in it. But he's also very, very fondly remembered. His name is still sung at games sometimes. So so him having got the goal back, we then made it 2-2, and then Steve Morrison popped up to win the game at the end in front of a crowd of 53,262 for the FA Trophy, which is, not bad going. So the next game I've picked out was in 2009. And I did say the first time we were doing this, I said, I'm not necessarily going to choose all wins. This was a game, it was a playoff semi-final against Cambridge United. and there's 30 miles between Stevenage and Cambridge. So that is, definitely a local rivalry. And Stevenage had won the first leg 3-1, and I was actually in Kiev watching that game. I'd actually had a bit of a row with the girlfriend, now my wife, so obviously we sorted it out. But I was in the pub watching that, and Stevenage had a player sent off. It was one of those ones that was very, very harsh, but it was later rescinded. But it was one of those cases where the sending off actually galvanizes the team. So from 1-0 down, we won that game 3-1. And, it was a performance of real character. And it really, really looked as if we would, go through the second leg and get to the final. So people, went up to Cambridge in large numbers. I remember it was an amazing kind of away following, and all the people I knew that watched Stevenage at that time, they were all there. And it was, 90 minutes of singing, which actually, Stevenage fans have been a kind of ragtag band over the years. And I remember there was a Wolves supporter tweeting about us a few years ago, saying that we were great support, but our chants were quite weird. But I remember it was great support that day.
Hey, you got his attention at least.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the time when kind of the second era of Graham Wesley was just beginning to take off. And I think it's an important game because it's a game where we learned a lot of vital lessons that made us stronger.
First time there?
No, that was already his second. I know it's hard to keep track of, but we did say
that's why I wanted to check. Okay, so this was Wesley's second time there. Okay.
Yeah, so we did say he was similar to the coach that you mentioned last time out.
Oh, Cotton Fitzsimmons.
That's the one. Yeah. So like a bad penny, he was back again. And that was, a Stevenage team which starts to look recognisable to, even younger fans of today. So Chris Day, who was, a great servant to the club, the Stevenage keeper for a long time. Ronnie Henry, who I think is, he's a record appearance holder. So he last played last season. John Ashton, known as the Animal. Mark Roberts, who at that time, he was a real find from the kind of deepest non-league. And Mark Roberts was known at that time for this flowing, dyed blonde hair, which gave him this kind of Braveheart look. We had Scott Laird, left back, who, on his day, was capable of terrific goals. Michael Bostwick, who went on to better things. And so, that kind of great team was starting to take shape, but they learned a tough lesson that day. Because Graham Wesley is known for a bit of gamesmanship, and he is quite clever with it. I don't know if you remember, there was a World Cup match. I think it was Gus Hiddink, and there was a drinks break, and they claimed that he had changed the tactics during this drinks break, and that was a stroke of genius. And Stevenage fans had a little chuckle to themselves because Wesley thought of this first. In fact, we got so famous for players feigning injury and drinks breaks that fans of the other team would do the timeout kind of thing.
He'd do well over here in Phoenix because when it's 55 degrees Celsius, we get plenty of drinks breaks.
Yeah, exactly. He'd be in it.
I did while you were talking there, I did look up Cotton Fitzsimmons. It was only 3 times that he coached the Suns. So it was one less than I thought. But he coached
one less than Graham
Phoenix.
Wesley.
Yeah, see. But here's the impressive part: is so he coached them from 1970 to 1972, from 1988 to 1992, and then from 1996 to 1997. So it was 3 different times over a 27-year period. He passed away in 2004 at age 72. But yeah, so between 1970 and 1997, he coached 3 different times for the same team.
Wow, yeah. So not quite as many as Graham Wesley, but I think Graham Wesley start to finish only spans about 15 years. Anyway,
in between coaching, he would become their announcer, so he kind of never really left.
Wow. So I think, Graham Wesley was becoming known for his gamesmanship, and he basically was thinking, we've got a 2-0 lead on aggregate, so let's not kind of do anything crazy and let's just try and play out the game. That looked like it was working. Around half-time, it was still 3-1 to Stevenage, but then Cambridge changed things around and got 2 goals back in the 96th minute, so we were into extra time by that point. Scott Laird got sent off, which tended to hand the initiative to Cambridge, and Cambridge finally got the breakthrough in the 119th minute. The last minute but one of extra time, and I think I remember it because I was gutted. It's one of those things where our players are collapsing on the ground. But at the same time, watching 3 other sides of the ground go up like that, it's great theatre. And what I like to think is that it just kind of was a sort of refining us in the fire, because obviously the following year we won the conference very convincingly. So you like to think
that's something that's kind of been a common theme, and with Accrington, it wasn't the loss to Stevenage in 2011 so much, but it was I believe it was 2016 that they lost to the playoffs, and it was kind of after 2011 that team disbanded, where in 2016 they were able to kind of keep that same core together. And then that ultimately became the core of that promotion team. And a lot of those guys that have come on the show have said, kind of getting that far and losing taught us what we needed to be able to win the league, and kind of take the distance. And I think that that's something that you see across all sports. Like if you watch that documentary, The Last Dance, I'm not sure if you had or not, but they kind of talk about when the Chicago Bulls beating the Detroit Pistons after having lost to them the previous 2 years, and that before that the Detroit Pistons had to beat the Boston Celtics after having lost to them. It's kind of like you have to go through that experience of losing to know what it takes to win and take it to the top level sometimes.
I think so. It builds character. And, this is the beginnings of the team that I was talking about that went through League Two in a season. And then during that season in League Two, they beat Newcastle United 3-1 in, what was, curious about that Newcastle game was that our players looked the fitter players, they looked the hungrier players. They defended their lead by continuing to attack. They were almost relentless. And then, that team got all the way up to the League One playoffs before it started to kind of fall apart. So, I think I like to think that was a kind of that the defeat at Cambridge was a kind of crucible of our future success.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, especially the fact that it's kind of a derby game on top of everything else. And then, like you say, the 119th minute, I mean, that's the type of thing that if it happened in the World Cup or the Champions League, they would be talking about it for 50 years.
Well, I do have to say that the problem that I had was that I was working in Cambridge at that time. So it meant obviously having to go into work the following week and confront Cambridge United fans. We were victims that day of being a bit complacent because weirdly, Cambridge almost ended up playing Histon. Now, Histon is a strange team. So I'm going to just give a shout out to Dima Histon here, who's the Russian non-league guy who adopted them. Yeah, Histon is basically a team in the suburbs of Cambridge that came out of nowhere and were particularly good at the same time that Cambridge were particularly bad. So it was a great indignity for Cambridge United to have to play this, team from the suburbs. And that turned out to be kind of the high watermark of Histon's success. I mean, really, to have a village team like that in the Football League would have been remarkable, and one without the financial backing of a Forest Green or anything like that. And you know what? At half-time, when we thought we were going to go through, we were like, do you know what? I think I'm going to go up to the Histon game after this and see who we're going to be playing. I think we're all guilty of being a bit too cocky on the day. But I like to think we learned something from it. And the following week, having had that big, big disappointment, we had another FA Trophy final at Wembley. We had another win, 2-0 against York City. And again, but I think just because of geographical proximity, a lot of people come out of the woodwork and support Stevenage on those kinds of occasions. But having had that kind of vibe that, these big cup finals, we can't get our songs going, the regulars are all kind of spread out amongst everybody and things. And I just kind of sat back and enjoyed the occasion and felt like, do you know what, that away game at Cambridge, I sang my heart out, I put a shift in. And the following week at Wembley, I think I cheered the goals, but otherwise just kind of sat back and enjoyed it, really.
I think that's one of the kind of hidden joys of supporting a club that doesn't necessarily have huge expectations. I mean, if you're supporting Manchester United and you're doing anything less than winning the Premier League, you're having a miserable season. If you're supporting a team like Accrington or a team like Stevenage, sometimes you can just kind of sit back and say, you know what, we lost today, we're still punching above our weight, and that's kind of one of the joys of it, I think.
And I suppose what I need to remember at the moment in these very stressed times is I've always felt that ever since being in the Football League, that being in the Football League was always a bonus. It was always a kind of fantastic journey, but it's not something we ever took for granted or thought that we, automatically deserved. So, it's a nice opportunity for me to look back and say, these are 10 years that I perhaps thought we would never get.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. It's so funny just to for instance look at like Sunderland fans, for example, or Ipswich fans, and they'll be on the message board and they'll be like, oh, I can't believe we're stuck in this shit league again and blah blah blah. And I'm just thinking, wow, that must be a terrible way to live. Every morning I wake up and thank the Lord that Accrington Stanley's in League One.
Yeah. So, but it might not last. So enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm kind of getting at is that, you may lose a tough match here and there, but you have to appreciate that where you're at, and like you said, nothing lasts forever. I mean, even if you look at a team like Portsmouth, I mean, I'm sure that when you were a kid, you probably didn't think that Portsmouth was ever going to be below maybe the Championship.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's been quite an education on football in the last few years. But, I think non-league teams who have come up, they've just got to be very careful. I bumped into some Burton Albion fans because Burton-on-Trent isn't that far from Nottingham. And they were saying, because I was saying how our attendances have got stuck at around 2,000, 2,500 maybe, and then it tends to vary according to whatever away following turns up that day.
That's roughly about where Accrington is. I mean, if we get in 2,500 at the Wham, then that's a good day.
Exactly. And the thing is that I think I had imagined with the kind of success that Burton have had, that because they got all the way to the Championship and spent 2 seasons in the Championship, and I would have thought crowds must have gone up, but they said no. They said your basic crowd doesn't get any bigger it's 2,500, which means if you're a non-league side kind of making that jump, you've got to be careful. And, Yeovil, of course, got to the Championship, and for them it was a case of, Icarus getting too close to the sun, because they ended up with 3 relegations.
The thing about a place like Yeovil is, I think that they would actually have a better chance kind of than just about anybody, because, with Yeovil, you've got Exeter and Bournemouth, and then you're up at Bristol City, I guess, would be like the 3 closest teams, and I wouldn't say any of those are within more than 30 miles or so. If you look at a team like Burton Albion, obviously you've got Derby, you've got the 2 Nottingham teams, and then you get through. And so, it just seems like there's a lot more competition for a Burton Albion or obviously a Stevenage than there would be for a Yeovil.
Yeah, but again, back in the 90s, when, as I, talked about before, there were big crowds for top non-league games. And I think that Yeovil had a game against Enfield for promotion to the conference, at which they got 9,000, which is an incredible crowd for a club at that level. But I don't know if it's football on TV or what, but it's a very different world these days, and non-league clubs with kind of delusions of grandeur have got to be a bit careful.
Yeah, it seems to me that maybe football just quite isn't as big a thing in that southwestern peninsula of the Cornwall, Devonshire kind of area. Just doesn't seem to have quite as big of a football history or nearly as many clubs as obviously, Lancashire or London or someplace like that,
Yeah, well, they're a bit weird in the southwest. They're all rugby fans.
Well, at least that's where chickens come from, so they give you something. Well, we didn't get through all the games that you wanted to, so are you wanting to make this a 4-part series, and maybe a week or 10 days from now we'll do a part 4 of the recording? I'm just going to go ahead, and we've never done this before, but I'm going to make Stevenage our team of the month for June as well, because we actually had an announcement. So we'll just have a 2-month thing where Stevenage will be our team of the month for 2 months, and we'll do one more episode with you before the end of June and talk about those last 2 games. And hopefully maybe before June ends up, we might have some good news, and a vote will go in your way, and we'll be able to say, Stevenage will still be in League 2 next year.
We'll see about that. But yeah, if you'll indulge me, I'll be very happy to come on and talk about the Football League years.
Yeah, well, I'm excited too, and this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you taking the time as always. Before we did wrap up, was there anything on these matches that we had talked about today that you wanted to add in?
No, I think I pretty much got everything.
So we're going to go ahead and get together and add a 4th part to the series, and extend a 2nd month of Stevenage as our team of the month, just because you've been such a fantastic guest and had so many great stories that I want to keep this going and hear about the league year. So we'll look forward to talking again, and we will. We'll have one of our Belarus specialists coming up again soon too, right? And you had a special announcement for that one.
Yeah, so I'm going to be bringing in a friend, Ed Zilaski, who's going to help us out with that. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, fantastic. I'm looking forward to it, and we'll talk again soon. And appreciate talking with you today, Jonathan. And yeah, like I said, even as an Accrington fan, I'm rooting for Stevenage, for something to kind of hopefully go in you guys' favor.
Oh, well, I do appreciate it. Thank you. We need all the help we can get right now.
Cheers.
Talk to you soon.